Welcome in to the Paul Kuharsky podcast. Sorry for the brief delay. Part of 440 Network. I'm Paul Kuharsky of paulkuharsky.com, brought to you by ZenSports, who we'll talk about shortly. I appreciate you popping by. So much to talk about. We're going to talk about potential concerns with Calvin Ridley. We're going to talk about Steve McNair's murder as portrayed on Netflix. We're going to talk about the nuances of the IR rules that a lot of us, I am sure, don't know. We're going to talk about the 4 worst players on the Titans roster heading into cuts. We are going to get to some of your voicemails and some of your questions here. I've also got Kenneth Murray on leadership and Dillon Radunz on being about to secure the right guard position. Dennard Wilson on how many pass rush moves he wants from his guys. So lots to dig through. It's good to see you guys coming in. Tell your friends. Let's retweet for the live moment, and we'll dig right in here. Good to see you, Brooks, G, Focus, Kaysen. Here's the deal with Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley, we talked about last week, really disappeared during the joint practices against the Seahawks. But look, that's just 2 days. But he faced a big cornerback, Enrique Woolen, 6'5" guy, unique cornerback, physical dude. Took him out of those 2 practices, got in his head, said he didn't run hard and had energy issues during those practices on some deep ball. So that's a little bit concerning. And then this week, inconsistent again today. Offense couldn't get in any rhythm for a move it period early and later in a 2-minute drive. Now, after that move it period, during which Ridley 2 or 3 passes were just not in sync, during which Levis was in great sync with Tyler Boyd. They went to a special teams period, and during that special teams period, Levis primarily, but all the cornerbacks were working specifically with Ridley on some routes and some spot throws, which is not uncommon for a receiver who's not involved in special teams to work with the quarterbacks. We haven't seen it as much with Ridley as we'd seen it in the past with Hopkins when he's healthy, as we've seen it with a guy like Julio Jones when he was here. And look, I'm not ringing an alarm bell on Calvin Ridley, but I subbed on Robbie and Rex Road for Rex Road last week. We had Michael Duraco on, a good friend of mine, longtime friend of mine who's covered the Jaguars forever. He said last year in Jacksonville, Calvin Ridley had his big numbers despite there being an issue at times with him not getting to the right spot, not knowing the routes all the time. Now, he was moving all over the place in that Jacksonville offense because they had injury problems and couldn't deploy him the way they wanted to. Here, Brian Callahan's intention is to use him the way the Bengals used Jamar Chase. Now, they moved Chase around a little bit, but I think he's largely at that one position, Z. And that's what Ridley's going to be asked to do here. But we've got 2 weeks now of him not being in sync with Levis. And I'm just saying, it's my impression. I'm watching practice with some other reporters, and we're wondering, Levis is in such great rhythm with Boyd, who returned yesterday, and everything he threw to Boyd yesterday and today was spot on, like looked perfect. And then he's throwing the Ridley, and this stuff is off. Timing, sync. It just looks disconcerting. It's the opposite of what the plays to Boyd are. And what's Boyd's main feature? He knows this offense inside out, and they're, and Levis can lean on him. Levis can count on him. And so And then Ridley said something interesting. Teron Davenport's been working on a story or something about how guys deal with pressure. I wasn't involved in this conversation, but I've heard the audio of some of it. So he was asking Ridley, "Are you a prove it guy? Do you feel any pressure to fulfill the big contract? How do you maintain your mentality and your mindset?" This is all important context to the answer he gave. But he ultimately said, as part of this conversation, "I've played football a long time. They gave me a guaranteed contract. My money is guaranteed." And he laughed. Now, he's not by any means saying, like, I have no worries because my contract is guaranteed and everything like that. But back when he was signed, I wrote that I had people around the league who worried about Calvin Ridley with money. And I'm not saying that those concerns have come to the surface at this stage. But these last 2 weeks have not been good for Calvin Ridley. And everybody's saying that they're sure that it's going to be fine. When the time comes, they're sure that it's going to be fine. Ridley said that. Levis has said that. Callahan has said that. But there's a lot of things the Titans are going to be sure of now when the time comes around. They're sure of Awuzie, who is expected to return to practice next week. So he'll have, a 3-day week next week where they might be in pads once or twice. Then they've got a 4-day weekend. Then they've got their regular preparation week for the Bears trip for the opener. They're sure that L'Jarius Sneed, whose management plan through camp, which officially ended today, included very few practices, very little time with him on the field, a lot of Trey Avery substituting. They're sure of a lot of things that we have not seen in practice. And I don't just mean in practice on the practice field, but in practice in actuality. That's fine. I know what they're doing. I mean, they did the same thing in the Mike Vrabel regime with Julio Jones. That one didn't go well. Other things, L'Jarius Sneed didn't practice at all in camp last year with Kansas City, had a great year. That's what the Titans are counting on. I just have a little feeling about Calvin Ridley right now that things need to be smoothed out better before the season starts. They need to hit those balls in practice more regularly. Now, Ridley, I should say, came out of that really bad first period, jagged, went and did that work with the quarterbacks during the special teams period. They came back, the only good period the first team offense had, and that first period was against the second team defense, by the way. Came out and caught a beautiful fade from Levis on which he was starting this way, turned and caught it the opposite way, going to the ground against tight defense, made an excellent catch. But we talk about Levis being inconsistent up and down. Calvin Ridley in the last 2 weeks has been very inconsistent with more downs than ups, frankly. So those are my Calvin Ridley concerns right now. I want to see more. I'm looking here at some of your questions related to that. Is D-Hop going to be ready for week 1? Michael asks. That's the tone of what Brian Callahan said so far, but can't be sure until he's back out on the field and going. And Jose says, I feel like every season there's something like this going on with some key players that don't participate for various reasons. That's just part of the deal. Yeah, I think, I don't follow other teams nearly as closely as I follow the Titans. But it's been part of the deal here for sure. We're talking there more about the Titans secondary, particularly with Sneed and Awuzie, and Jamal Adams, who they're counting on less, who was out for a good stretch. And they've got guys out now who are not out long term necessarily, but aren't going to play this weekend. Guys, conceivably the three main guys competing for the slot position, Jaquan Jackson is a given to me now behind Boyd. the three receivers competing after that, who are primary slots, Kyle Phillips has a hamstring. He's not going to play. Kearis Jackson has a knee bruise, probably not going to play. And Mason Kinsey has a broken pinky, probably not going to play. Now, if Mason Kinsey, really pushed to play, maybe they would let him play with the broken pinky. But maybe he would mess up the broken pinky more. And if he messes up the broken pinky more in a push to make the roster and makes the roster, then he's less valuable to the roster with a worse broken pinky. So, there's an issue there. Item 2 here, I wanted to talk about the Steve McNair special on Netflix, which I watched last night after I should have watched it the first night, but then I got a text from an old high school friend of mine who wanted, knew I lived through covering the whole story and wanted to know a little bit more of what I had. It's called Untold, The Murder of Air McNair on Netflix. I think it's a really interesting show. It's a long 57 minutes. For people who didn't follow the case closely, who didn't know the 1999 Titans story and Steve McNair's story very well, even if you do, you'll find it interesting. And a lot of this stuff you haven't paid attention to in a long time, so it's a good revisitation of the whole story. Keith Norfleet is an interesting piece of the story. This guy worshipped Steve McNair. He was a huge Steve McNair fan. And he was dating Sahel Jenny Kazemi, who killed Steve McNair and killed herself, according to the official stuff. And I believe the official stuff. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I'm an Occam's razor guy, which means the simplest conclusion is usually the right conclusion. This guy was a massive Steve McNair fan. Like, he might have a Steve McNair tattoo. I think not, but he would have. And then she breaks up with him because she's involved with Steve McNair. And so this guy goes from the biggest Steve McNair fan possible to hating him because the girl he's in love with has left him to date Steve McNair. So he's a very sympathetic character in this. I think other thing that people maybe didn't realize, I didn't realize, I was talking to a Titans official who was with the team back then, who didn't realize the timetable that Jenny Kazemi all very quickly got a DUI with McNair in the car, who got picked up and left. And there's video of her calling him, asking for help, for a lift, all of that. And he blows her off pretty hard. So she's upset about that. She gets out of jail. She tells a friend, her life's falling apart. She might as well end it. Buys a gun from this guy and kills Steve and herself, all in the span of 4 days. A very compact timeline at which this all unfolds, which I didn't really realize it all happened that quickly. Did the police bungle some of this investigation? I certainly think the private investigator that's involved in this special, Vincent Hill, points out a bad thing, that the guy that she bought the gun from, she had a huge text relationship with. And they interviewed him only in the presence of his girlfriend, who he wasn't going to admit in front of that he had some kind of relationship with Kazemi in front of. So, is it possible that this guy was somehow involved to a larger degree? Sure. Jeff Fisher says, do I think maybe something is incomplete there? Yes. But ultimately, I've accepted this and I've let it go. And I think that, that's where I am on it. And that's where I think people should be on it. And this Vincent Hill, the private investigator, has been pushing that the police have botched it for a long time. But the police say, the main detective says, who's Vincent Hill? And how many murder cases has he solved? And I asked the same question. Who's Vincent Hill? And what are his motives in it? I think he wrote a book. It was no bestseller. Maybe he made a couple dollars on it. But who's Vincent Hill? And what are his motives? And, everybody looks for conspiracy and everything. Less back when Steve was killed in 2009 than now. I think it's a good TV watch. And by the way, half of it is reminiscence of the Titans of that era. It takes you through the 99 Super Bowl ride and Steve's career. A lot of Tennessean headlines in there. I want to reach out to my old editor who wrote all of those headlines. My kid was videotaping the one time my byline came up in the corner, but brought back a lot of memories for me of covering that season and game stories that I wrote, and the run that they went on in '99 with the home winning streak. So it's a nice memory ride through what was an amazing season for Steve. I also thought it was thin on people. They had one TV reporter who was there and covering it, and she did a good job of explaining the story as it unfolded for her. Fisher really was the driver of the narrative, and Brad Hopkins was on it. Then they had the detective, they had Norfleet, but I thought they could have gone with more players. They could have gone with more reporters. They had Big Daddy Gaddy. They could have gone with more friends. It could have been longer. It could have been deeper in terms of the sources that they used. So I don't know. I'm curious if any of you watched it and who talked about it. I see some of you probably mentioning Tim Rohan's pod, which I didn't think was particularly Fall of a Titan. I don't remember it that well. I remember not being as impressed with it as I expected to be based on the quality of journalist that Tim Rohan is. There was some conspiratorial things in there that I didn't think had great foundation. And so I'm curious what you guys think of it. Yeah, Robert Gaddy comes across a little questionable. All right, a lighthearted moment on Robert Gaddy. Jim Wyatt and I, good friends, and we used to work at the Tennessean together a way back from. We covered the team together from 99 to 2009 or 2008 when I left for ESPN. And so we would always be on the same flight to go to games together. And we had a pretty good scam. He was a window guy. I was an aisle guy. And we spread out, made ourselves sick, made ourselves asleep to try to get the middle seat on Southwest flights free, empty, if there were going to be empty seats, or to try to make sure if somebody ended there, it was a pretty girl or a thin person or whatever. If we knew it was full, we'd keep our eye open and then be awake for the right person to come in. We had a crack of dawn flight back from the AFC Championship in Oakland, which, a game ended late. We wrote late. We got back to the hotel. Of course, we're all juiced up. Get very little sleep, get to the airport, shuttle bus drove away from us that I yelled at, we end up at the gate, whatever. We get on the flight, we're doing our thing. And Big Daddy Gaddy walks down the aisle past us. And Jim says, we dodged a bullet there. And we get the turnaround. Big Daddy Gaddy comes back, taps me on the arm, gets in. So Big Daddy Gaddy was big at that stage. What was this, 2008, 2007, January of 2008 maybe? And Big Daddy Gaddy pries himself into this middle seat between Jim Wyatt, whose face is like plastered onto the window, and me, who is spilled over into the aisle with the drink cart just smashing me every time they came up or down the aisle. For some reason, I asked him about the shared armrest and ended up with no armrest. It was miserable. That's my big life experience with Big Daddy Gaddy. All right, I see a lot of comments, so we'll. Trey just kind of asks, what was it like to watch something like that as someone who was close to Steve and so many in that doc? It's just kind of a lot of memories. I was on the periphery of a lot of that stuff. And it was, just brought back a lot of memories, took me back in time, made me feel old, certainly, for a lot of that. So, yeah, Ed says, by the title, I would have thought this was going to be a deeper dive into the different theories of his murder. And Nick says he feels sorry for Michelle and the kids. He cheated on her with so many others. I mean, he was living quite the lifestyle. So that's that. All right. A couple football questions off of the McNair thing. Zach says, for real, why is Weaver on this team? He still sucks. Another J-Rob fail. Well, Weaver was what? 5th round pick. Why is he on this team? I mean, who do you want to remove him from this team? There's some Caleb Murphy talk. Dennard Walker talked up Caleb Murphy. I know Mike Herndon's big on Caleb Murphy. I haven't seen Caleb Murphy do anything. I don't think Rashad Weaver's at any risk of not being on this roster. He played a lot. He's regularly, if not the starting linebacker, he's the first linebacker after Key and Landry, to me, regularly right there. And he played a ton of special teams in the second preseason game. Who are they cutting him for? Thomas Rush? I think if Caleb Murphy makes it, he would be a 5th outside linebacker. I don't think they keep 5, and I think he's a better overall player than Caleb Murphy. Caleb Murphy maybe shows some rush potential once in a while, but he's not can't do the other things that Weaver is asked to do. I'm not saying that Weaver shows up, but I mean, the Titans' 4th, the equivalent of the 4th outside linebacker position at any position on this roster, is not particularly good. So we have that going for us as we watch the Titans. You can't expect a lot of depth. Let's while we're talking about depth, let's go to our first phone call. And I appreciate you guys calling in. If you're a member, you've got access to the private voicemail line. Here is Randy asking about one of the linebackers who should be prominent and is not.
TK, long-time reader, long-time listener, all the way back to the early.
That is not Randy, unfortunately. Randy wanted to ask about Cedric Gray. Sorry. Want to know if he's going to be ready for opening day and if I can envision him in the lineup coming up. I cannot. Cedric Gray is out still with a shoulder injury. He's been on the side field the last 2 days and wasn't making any noise before that. So it's a disappointment for 4th round pick. Guys drafted after him, Jaquan Johnson, Jalen Harrell, 7th rounder, making noise. You're getting contributions and optimistic feel for guys from this draft. The one guy who's a blank right now is Cedric Gray, right? So could they potentially try to slide him on injured reserve? I don't know. Let's talk about injured reserve. There's a new rule this year. So it used to be you get to cut day and you would have to put a player on your 53-man roster for 24 hours before you could put him on injured reserve, which made for fudging. Or you could cut him, make a side deal, bring him back, and all of that. So that would make you have to make a side deal. Hey, we're going to keep Paul to put him on IR, and we'll re-sign you tomorrow after the 24 hours passes. The league has changed that rule. So when you're making cuts on Tuesday at 4:00 Central, I believe, in line with those cuts, you could put as many as 2 guys on IR who are recallable after they're out for 4 weeks. You still have 8 recallable IR slots during the season. Those 2, if you choose to use them, 1 or 2 count against that 8. So it is a little less complicated. Do the Titans have an injury that's worth using that way? I don't know that any of them are long-term enough to use that way. Here's Brian Callahan.
Sure, those are always conversations, and you see where guys are at. Guys that can return, that could go on IR and return to play. That's obviously part of the process too. So, yeah, I mean, that's always going to be part of the conversation is how do those spots come into play and where do they factor? And most years they factor some way, shape, or form. So I would think that that's something we'll explore as we get closer to the cutdown.
Easier now because you don't have to get him through.
It's much easier now than I used to have to cut a guy and tell him you're going to bring him back and have a handshake agreement, and usually a veteran player that you bring him back to carry a guy through to then put him on IR. So that's a benefit being able to do that this year.
Most people kind of misunderstand IR though and think, oh, well, you can go hide a guy on IR. Like, all right, Cedric Gray hasn't developed. They can put him on IR and burn him there for the year. Since they've got a glut of inside backers, and people want to, so Murray and Gibbons are the starters. And then you're going to look at Chance Campbell and James Williams, Otis Reese, potentially. I stop at Campbell and Williams, but then Reese would be next. Luke Gifford still in the mix there. He's coming back from concussion. I think he's a cut who saves you a lot of money, but you can't stash a guy. So here's how IR works. This is an important distinction that I got clarified on. When you put a guy on IR, you submit paperwork to the league from your medical people that describe his injury, the extent of his injury, maybe the MRI or the x-rays or whatever, even that. But a thorough report, there's paperwork. And with that paperwork comes a designation, major or minor. So if you're putting him on major IR, that's season-ending IR, right? If you're putting him on minor IR, that comes with, and that would be a designation to return, a minor IR. That means you're going to recall him. So a guy that you put on recall would be minor, right? Or if he's not on recall, that means that there is a date by which you expect him to be healthy, and provided that he meets that timetable, or you extend that timetable if his rehab winds up taking longer, you then have to, if he's not a recall guy, you could settle with him sooner, or when he reaches that point, you have to release him. And he would be free to, after the period of time passes, sign elsewhere and could resurface. So there are two levels of IR really that aren't made public, whether it's season ending or not season ending, plus the designation to return. So really 3 levels of IR. Let's see what else you've got. Do I feel good about Levis and the offense by the start of the season, or are practice struggles that are reported hinting at time needed for the offense to gel through the season? From Darcy. Well, I certainly think they're going to need some time when the season gets going, but you never know. Look, the preseason often means nothing. So it's possible that they get into the season and light it up when the playbook opens up and when the games get going. It's possible. It's also possible that this practice stuff is a forecast of things to come, and that they're going to have some trouble. So we don't have to know. We have to wait and see. So there's no definite answer on that. Here's Kenston asking a question about Radunz. He said Radunz graded very well via PFF last year. Can he be a surprise on the line? I have a lot of respect for Dillon Radunz, who kind of withstood stuff that a lot of guys don't withstand. I mean, he's a bust in terms of what was expected of him as a second-round pick. He needed to come in and replace Isaiah Wilson at right tackle, and he failed on multiple occasions to solve the right tackle problem, to the point that they again, kept having to address the right tackle spot. So you've got that. And then, he's drafted to be a tackle, which is more of a premium spot. And 2 regimes have judged him, including Bill Callahan, who is a big-time judger of talent, to be a guard. But he's on the cusp of being declared, no matter what happened to make it so, he's on the cusp of being named the starting right guard. Barring something crazy happening in New Orleans on Sunday or between now and the opener, injury-wise, Nicholas Petit-Frere is the starting right tackle, and Dillon Radunz is the starting right guard. So I had a chance to talk to Radunz today on Thursday and ask him kind of about what this means to him to be on the verge of this being named a opening day starter.
Yeah, I think I mean, obviously it's a story of just perseverance and just continuing to grow through all good times and bad times. So yeah, I mean, when that comes to fruition, just learn from the down times, fought through adversity, and obviously there's still a long journey ahead. I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done. I want to have a long career, so in order to have that, I still need to perform at a high level and continue to grow. So those are the goals, those are the things I'm trying to do, and yeah, it'll be a good story. Hopefully at the end of my life. So,
how far have you come as a player since you got here?
A lot. I think a lot as a player, as a person. My faith has grown a lot. Yeah, it's been huge just these last 3.5 years or so. So yeah, I'm excited to continue to grow, and I'm excited with the progress I've made, and I think I've got a good coaching staff around me to help me do that, good people around me, great teammates, so I'm excited.
I hope he plays well. I think he's been through a heck of a lot. It's not his fault that he was overdrafted by John Robinson. And now he's got a very good situation, obviously, with Bill Callahan. And I just hope, look, they need him to be good, obviously, given that their lack of options behind him. But I find Dillon Radunz to be a pretty accountable stand-up guy who's had the maturity track that you would want a guy in that situation to be in. Time for a word about ZenSports, my sponsor of this fine podcast. ZenSports, no danger first wager. Here's how you should use it. Go there, sign up, get the app for ZenSports, and use the code TNPAUL to sign up, TNPAUL. Then bet as little as $10. You get a 1-year membership to paulkuharsky.com. And then you win your $10 bet, hopefully. But you can make a bet as big as $1,000, no danger first wager. $1,000 with odds up to plus 500. Win it, and boy, you've done awfully well for yourself. Lose it, and within 24 hours, you get your money back. So that's how ZenSports would get you started. You could start to go find win totals, NFL stuff to get your season ready. I'm big on the Giants under, and we're going to talk right now about the Titans record. ZenSports, they're really good to me. I hope you'll be really good to them. Check them out, ZenSports.com. Use the code TNPAUL when you sign up and bet at least $10 on your first bet. Let's get over here to a question from the voicemail line where members can be part of the broadcast. And here's Dwayne.
Paul, this is Dwayne. Hope this finds you well. Looks like you've had a nice temperature break out at camp this week. No, you don't like doing predictions, but where do you see if the team stays healthy and Levis steps up and the O-line isn't a mess? Where do you see the record? Do you see it improving off of last year? Do you see them vying for a wild card spot? Do you see them drafting in the top 5 like a lot of the national pundits say? Thanks, man. Take it easy. Bye.
I think they're better than last year, and I think they're
Paul,
better
this is
than
Dwayne. Hope this finds you well.
In the top
Looks
5.
like you've had a
sure.
nice.
Sorry about that. Better than drafting in the top 5 for sure. I think I just ran through the schedule. He's right. I'm not big on making predictions. I ran through the schedule. I found eight wins. Now that's with me thinking that they're going to split in the division, 3-3. Houston could be good enough to sweep them. Colts could be bad enough to get swept by them. I don't know there, but I think they'd be in the 7-8 win range. If you're in the 8-win range, you're probably, within a win of the seventh playoff spot, the last wild card spot, which I think is one playoff team too many. I think it's been proven. There are 6 good teams in a conference in a year, 6 playoff worthy teams, and they've shoved in an extra one that's not the quality of the rest of the playoff field, which I think has been a mistake. So I think they'll be in that range. But again, I'm not into playoff predictions, and I don't have a lot of faith in record predictions. I don't have a lot of faith in mine. I don't have a lot of faith in very many. So, I wouldn't go make a bet based on that or anything like that. So it looks like we're not on Twitter here, which I don't really get for some reason. So let me see here what else I have. I was struck when L'Jarius Sneed said in a question about Kenneth Murray, but without really being pushed on it, that he's our leader, basically. And I think that's a big mantle for Kenneth Murray out of nowhere from somebody like L'Jarius Sneed. And so Murray talked today a little bit about leadership. And I'm going to add some context to this after we hear what Kenneth Murray had to say. Well, Kenneth Murray didn't make it in there. Kenneth Murray, the biggest thing that he said, I apologize again for that. Kenneth Murray, the biggest thing he had to say was that he is not out to prove people wrong. He is out to prove people who believe in him right. And I think that's maybe that's a little bit of a hokey distinction, but I like it. And I think there's some nobility to that. Kenneth Murray, I think, has grown on the press corps in general, and there's a void on defense for leadership. I wouldn't have thought that Kenneth Murray was a guy who would fill it based on how he played with the Chargers coming into this team, and I wouldn't have thought it based on the role that he would have here. I think this team's going to play one inside linebacker a lot. It's going to be him. And I think there's a lot of room for him to lead. And I think every time I hear him speak, I think, well, there's a guy who can be a leader. Here's another thing I've been thinking about this week in terms of the pass rush. And this comes from the 7th round pick, Jalen Harrell, who said that he didn't get to use his freaky stuff when he had 2 sacks in the preseason game against Seattle at Nissan Stadium. He was determined the first chance he had just to use a power move and to make the most out of the power move. And he did. He got a sack out of it, but he said he didn't get to his freaky stuff. So Dennard Wilson was asked this week about how many moves and how he would like his pass rushers to kind of approach going after the quarterback.
Well, right now, I just want him to have 2 in the toolbox right now. And that's for mostly all of them, especially the young guys. What do you do extremely well? Okay. Hold on to that one and then have a second move. As you start to master those 2, now we can pick up another one to put in that toolbox. But for me, I like seeing them go hit somebody in the face early on to kind of set the message and then try to win on the edge.
I think that's pretty interesting. Like I would think most guys come into the NFL and feel like they need more than that. And would feel like an offensive lineman trying to stop them from getting to the quarterback would look at them and know those 2 moves and feel pretty comfortable trying to block those two moves. But Dennard Wilson just wants to see those two moves executed very well, and a guy try with great effort to win with those two moves. And I like that thinking a lot. And this is another example of, how much more fun it is to cover this team, because you take a question like that. And I don't think that was my question, but it doesn't matter whose question it is. You take kind of something where you have a preconceived notion to these coaches, and they disavow that notion, but in a friendly way and an educational way. And so we're learning a lot about what they're trying to do, why they're trying to do it, and about football from them. It's refreshing. It's helpful. It's good. Let's take some more questions here and keep this going. Time is flying here. It's okay if Gray doesn't work out, Chris Fleming says, because a lot of other picks seem great so far. I don't disagree. Seem great so far is the key, right? I mean, Jalen Harrell hasn't taken this and done it in an NFL game yet, and there's a big difference between preseason game where he's gone against 2s or 3s and a regular season game. Same for Jaquan Jackson. Same for, I'm forgetting some of these lower draft picks. Cedric Gray certainly hasn't done it yet. But I think it's an important distinction that we just have to be patient with some of these guys. Brownlee has been really, really good. It's hard to imagine that it doesn't translate, right, to the regular season. But we can't be sure that it will translate. So we just got to wait and see for sure. Is it a deeper team, Ed asks, top to bottom than last year? Or is it just the fact that the starters are better? It's deeper, but it's still not deep. I mean, last year was super, super thin. Callahan said today, probably 5 spots up for grabs out of this weekend. By my count, 6 or 7. So they're more certain on 2 guys than I am. But you would like not to really still be determining 5 or 6 guys going into the last game who are fringe guys. Patrick is asking what I think of the season. I just covered that a little bit ago. Is Levis's inaccuracy, Gary asks, a legitimate concern? Sometimes it's a concern. He threw some balls today that didn't seem catchable. That should be. Intermediate is where he seems to have the problem. Like 12 or 15 to 22 yards is not a good area for him sometimes. So I don't know. Titan surprise camp cut, Trey wants. Outside chance, Vanette? I don't think there's really a big surprise. Trey Avery? I mean, is that a surprise? Malik Willis? Is that a surprise? Nick has 3 guys going to IR. Well, if you put 3 guys on returnable IR, first off, you can't put 3 guys on returnable IR Tuesday. You can only put 2. McClendon's the only one whose injury, could conceivably be a 4-week injury. Gray's certainly shouldn't be. Phillips might be, but you're burning 3 returnable slots there. And then what if you have a slew of injuries later on? You really have hurt your roster maneuverability. So I would be careful with going that heavy that fast. And I don't think Gray's injury, if he's already on the field doing side work, then you're a week away. I don't think you're 4 or 5 weeks away. So Chase wants to know, is there any way they keep 6 inside linebackers? Again, now we're talking, I think that they could play half the time with 1 inside linebacker on the field, maybe more, because of how much they like nickel and heavy nickel and dime, etc. So you've got Murray, Gibbons, Chance Campbell, Otis Reese, James Williams, and Cedric Gray. 2, 4, 6. I mean, that's an awful lot. They'd all have to Otis Reese, James Williams, Cedric Gray, Chance Campbell, and Gibbons would all be playing on special teams, but 2 of those guys would have to be down, I think, on game day. Look, it's not inconceivable, but I don't know. I think you're really stretching. Chance Campbell's had a good preseason. He's hurt a lot. You're counting on a lot of hurt guys there. I don't think so, but, maybe. Robert asks about Sweat. Is Sweat still looking impressive? Are Simmons and Sweat going to be a problem for opposing teams? They should be. But, I mean, if you think Sweat and Simmons look intimidating side by side, did you see the pictures of Sweat and Jelly Roll side by side? Titans really overselling that they sang a duet. I mean, did anybody hear Sweat sing while Jelly Roll was singing? He whispered 2 words. That's not a duet. We're Music City. We should know what a duet is. Here's T'Vondre Sweat standing next to Jelly Roll, which is cool. He wasn't singing. All right, we've got a call here that I definitely want to take from. We'll leave this guy anonymous, I think.
TK, longtime reader, longtime listener, all the way back to the early days when you were doing an hour a week with the Wake Up Zone. So watching this training camp unfold, one thing that we sort of knew has become a little more clear on the forefront of the conversation. A lot of the veterans that this team is counting on, a little bit older. Some have been hurt during training camp, raises some concerns about players such as Hopkins, players such as Snead, Boyd. Are these players going to be able to hold up for 17 games? It's a thin football team in some positions. So my question for you very simply is this. A lot has changed. They've changed head coach, they have changed general manager, and they have changed quarterback in the last 18 months. If this season does not go well, let's say this team wins 4 football games, what do you think the narrative will be come December into January? Looking into the crystal ball, what will fans be most upset about? What will be complaining about? And let's be honest, Paul, we've seen Amy fire somebody pretty much every off-season or every moment of embarrassment, whether it was the offensive coordinator, the general manager, the head coach, the special teams coordinator. What should we be looking to as the potential Amy gets upset, embarrassed, and fires somebody irrationally?
I don't think that she's going to fire somebody irrationally after the season. Now, I remember very clearly Jim Schwartz talking about making the mistake of thinking that his first staff in Detroit should be his staff. All right. I think this staff looks pretty good, but I think Brian Callahan should have some flexibility if things don't go well and there's a coach that he thinks wasn't as good as he wanted, that he allow himself the opportunity to make a change. And that he can empower Amy to feel like she's making that change if things go badly. But I think the question here is a good one in terms of what's the narrative if the season goes badly. And I think there are probably 3 potential narratives here, some of them overlapping. Injuries, old guys, and stars underperforming. All right. And as I said, they overlap. Injuries, they brought on Snead, who has got a knee issue. He's making big money, and they're looking for him to set the tone of the defense in a lot of ways. He's not practiced really through training camp, which ended today. Awuzie is coming off. He's a year removed now from a bad injury. Pollard is a year removed now from a bad injury. Simmons has had injuries the last 2 years really dent his season. Tyjae Spears has no ACL in one of his knees. Jamal Adams, they're not counting on for a lot, but he's been a major injury guy. And, does this new training staff holistically keep a team from suffering, help keep a team from suffering more soft tissue injuries? And then what's the luck factor? The Titans have been a very unlucky injury team for the last 2 or 3 years. So that's a big one. Old guys, Condre Diggs is old. Tyler Boyd is old. DeAndre Hopkins is old. Nick Vannett is old. Nick Folk is old. Morgan Cox, less important. Age is less important there. Those guys are old. You're counting on a good deal from Diggs, Boyd, and Hopkins for sure. Folk for sure. And then stars. This overlaps to a degree, but Jeff Simmons, can he produce at a star level? Calvin Ridley, can he produce at a star level? Can your quarterback, who's unproven, produce, not at a quarterback star level, but somewhat at a star level? And that's another big storyline. If Levis is bad, will we be saying that they overestimated the quarterback? I won't say they overestimated the quarterback, because you got to pick a quarterback and give him some run, and they will have picked a quarterback and given him some run. But, will that be the narrative, that they picked the wrong quarterback, gave the wrong quarterback some run, and need to be back in the market for a quarterback? All of these are potential storylines if things go badly for the 2024 Titans. Chris Key says this is a question that could apply to every team in the league, and I think that's fair, except every team in the league isn't coming off what amounts to a 2-year mess that the Titans are coming off, where there's a lot of confusion. Somebody said in here that they think one of those linebackers on that long list of inside linebackers we just discussed would replace Haskins. I'm not a big special teams guy, but when I watch special teams, I see something special in Hassan Haskins. I don't look at one of those linebackers and be like, wow, that guy is really a demon on special teams. Kieris, I got an answer on today in terms of the quality of his returning that suggests, I had him making it in my file yesterday. I won't have him making it in my file before cuts, coming off the New Orleans game, where he's unlikely to play because of a bruised knee. DMR, I think, is making it. Let's see what else I had on here that I need to go. I want to tell you about the 4 worst players on the team, and I think this is telling. I think the 4 worst players on the 91-man roster right now are, in order, drum roll please, Thomas Rush, who had a chance to make some impact as an outside linebacker and a pass rusher, who's not been heard from at all, is not very good. JoJo Domann, inside linebacker. We're talking about all these inside linebackers. We've never talked about JoJo Domann. Tay Gowan, cornerback, and Robert Javier, I think, is the worst player on the team. All these guys are defensive. You will notice all of these guys are defensive. I'm not counting the 2 guys that they've signed most recently. I believe one was a backer, and one's definitely a defensive lineman. Don't know much about those and haven't looked at them very closely. But if you go on offense, Malik Willis is not a very good player to me. Running backs, Jamari Small, not a bad player. He's not going to make the team. He might be on the practice squad. Jabari Small, not a very good player. The last wide receiver in the pecking order, Sam Schnee, not a horrific player, catches the ball. Every year there's usually a wide receiver who drops passes constantly. Second lowest guy in the pecking order is probably Bryce Oliver. Bryce Oliver should be on the practice squad. He makes a lot of catches for Malik Willis. Pretty good player. Steven Stelanos, the last tight end, makes some plays. Not a bad player at all. Iowa tight end, but just on that pedigree alone. Offensive line, it's hard to say who the last offensive lineman is. Probably Brian Dooley, tackle. But we've seen worse. Maybe he should be in the conversation. I don't know. But it's a lot harder to find terrible players on at the very back end of the offense than it is on the very back end of the defense. Is Oliver getting cut? Awaken asks. Yeah. I mean, who's he keeping in front of? They're keeping 7 wide receivers maximum, and he's not in the conversation. He's had a good camp. Again, he's playing third team all the time. But I think he'd be on the practice squad automatically. Arden Key got a very good review from Brian Callahan today. Brian Callahan, who called him situational player the very first time he talked about him at the owners' meetings, talked about him having a very good camp and rounding into a more complete player. So Beef French is saying Arden Key isn't a starter to him. I think he's underperformed and he's a backup. Do I see anybody on this team who could overtake him? I don't. I mean, I think Harrell is a good story right now, but probably very difficult for him to get up there. Rashad Weaver limited. Caleb Murphy, I'm not sure makes the team. So, looking for another question or two, but I think we're in a good position here, and this has been a good and thorough conversation. So I appreciate all of you. Tomorrow we will have Mr. Mike Herndon's stab at a 53-man roster. I won't be going to New Orleans. I don't think preseason game travel is a necessity. Chris Key asks if Shane Ray is making a team. I think Shane Ray has dropped and would have to be the 5th outside linebacker. So I don't suspect so. I am going to Pittsburgh for the memorial of a friend. If you listened to my podcast elsewhere, where I was talking about things I was upset about, one of them was a bad health turn for an old friend of mine who passed away about 6 weeks ago. So I'm going up to Pittsburgh for a celebration on his behalf. I'll be back in Nashville to watch the game, and I will be talking to you about what unfolds for the Titans in their final preseason contest. And then we'll be 2 weeks away from opening day, which hopefully will go fast, but can take a long time. Don't block the box. Be sure to lock your locks. Thanks for coming, everybody. I appreciate you very much. Join